You already guessed it. I'm going to be preaching today on the idea that God made us male and female. I'm going to specifically focus on how God made men this morning. Caveat. Apologies, if apologies are needed. Women, please stay with me here. I think you'll see at the end, this isn't going to turn into a frat house this morning. I think you'll understand why I'm focusing on the men this morning. I am relying pretty heavily, you guys, on some resources this morning. I really like pointing you to these resources because I think maybe some of you will read them. I don't know if that's true or not. But today, I'm working on the shoulders of a sermon preached by the leader of Confluence, our national family of churches, named Brian Mowry. And there's a link in the email that's being sent out this week. I know I promised it last week, but it's happening this week. That has some resources from a leaders conference that Megan and I were at recently, and a sermon that Brian preached. If you listen to that sermon, you'll get like the longer version. With even more stats and information than what I'm giving today. I'm building on the shoulders of that message. I got a lot of my information from him, and we both got a lot of our information from this book right here by a woman named Nancy R. Piercy, and it's titled "The Toxic War on Masculinity." You know the phrase "toxic masculinity" is a big phrase in our culture today. This book is packed with incredible stories and statistics about the issue in our culture today. And so anyways, I like to cite my sources, right? I think that's a good habit. Oftentimes what I'm doing up here is just repeating the good ideas of people who you wouldn't listen to or read if it weren't for me. So here we go with that. So today's first slide came from Genesis 1, verse 27. And we've been walking through the book of Genesis. We're about 2 months into our study of the book of Genesis. And along the way, I've been stopping and pointing us towards different topics or themes in the story of creation. And there's a lot that we can glean from just the first chapter of Genesis, the first couple chapters of Genesis. And so today I wanted to just pause and stop about the fact that when God created us, he created us in his image, and he created us male and female. And I think that there's three essential fundamentals that we learn about gender from Genesis 1 and this verse. The first is that we've been made male and female. And I suppose there was a time and place where you didn't need to say that in church. And as you know, we no longer live in that time and place. And so the reality that I want to just proclaim first and foremost is that our biology, the way that we were created, male and female, it matters. I've said a lot of times in this series that the point of Genesis 1 was not primarily to tell a scientific story about how the world was created. Well, our biology, our gender, male and female, the fact that we were made male and female, both in the image of God, might be the most important scientific fact in Genesis 1, or at least the most important scientific statement in Genesis chapter 1. The second fundamental that we learn about gender from Genesis 1 is that we, both male and female, have a lot in common, but we're not the same. We have a lot in common, meaning God made us both in his image. Men and women are different than animals. And I know, ladies, sometimes we don't feel that much different than animals, but a godly man is different than an animal, as is a woman. God differentiated humanity from the rest of the created order. And as we've been learning, design structure points to divine purpose. Divine structure, like our biology, our sexuality, our gender, points to divine purpose. It matters big time, you guys. God wasn't just willy-nilly creating us with a bunch of scientific realities at work. He had purpose in the way that he created us. Like, for example, men on average, you probably know this, men on average are bigger, stronger, and more aggressive. And we play a distinct role in reproduction. I'll leave the birds and the bees at that for today. The male role in reproduction is different, you guys. Newsflash. And women have less of this hormone that we call testosterone. Can I hear you grunt, gentlemen? Anybody watch Tim Allen? Was it Tim Allen? Yes. Oh man, taking it back. You 90s children. Women have less testosterone. You knew that. And women play a specific role in reproduction, a specific role in bearing children. And the role that women play in bearing children, it actually physiologically makes them more nurturing and emotionally intuitive on average, right? And so this is on average, right? There are some women who are stronger than some men, right? And you guys know my wife, and she's way better at certain things, even physical things, than I am, because she's a beast. No, she's not a beast. That's a joke, right? You get what I'm saying. On average, these are scientific realities, differences in the genders on average, right? The third thing that I want to say is that even though I'm focusing today on men, both genders matter. In fact, I'm focusing on men today because both genders matter. We were made in the image of God. We, male and female, were made in the image of God. We both reflect him. We both have something to show the world about God by the way that he designed us. Both genders matter. Christianity has gotten some bad pub in recent years for promoting supposedly toxic forms of masculinity. You've maybe heard terms like patriarchy and masculinity and gender used in negative ways. But let me remind you, it's Christianity that radically changed the ancient world by elevating the status of women. And if you think that that's just me talking as a pastor, echoing the company line, you should read a book called Dominion by this British man named Tom Holland. He's a non-Christian European historian with one of the world's most popular podcasts called The Rest is History. And he noticed that the spread of Christianity did a lot to elevate the position and the status of women in the ancient world. Now, some of you are asking questions because you've heard the passages. I wanted to. There's one verse in the New Testament that's really hard to explain at times. This may be your least favorite verse, women. I've been told this is the least favorite verse for women. There's this verse in 1 Peter 3:7 that refers to wives as the weaker vessel, the weaker partner. Maybe you're familiar with that verse. If you're not, just don't look it up. Pretend it's not there. No, I'm joking. We don't have to be ashamed of anything that's in there. Weaker, yes, maybe. Less valuable? No. And I guess it depends what is meant by weaker. I think specifically the author, Peter, is referring to weaker as in physical strength, which we've already said is a scientific fact that on average, women are not as strong as men because of design, testosterone, right? So likely this is all he was inferring. Likely this was all he was inferring. This is also why this idea that women are the weaker vessel is also why biological males playing against biological females in sports is insane. But anyway, in terms of purpose and value, we know that both male and female were created in the image of God. So both male and female, equal value, dignity, worth, purpose in the world before God. Weaker does not mean inferior. We would never say that because Megan can't bench press as much as me, she's inferior to me. Think of it this way, a good analogy maybe, or maybe a bad analogy. I'll let you decide. Think about the difference between a big gulp cup, 7-Eleven big gulp soda cup, and a champagne glass. Which is better, folks, a big gulp cup or a champagne glass? Which is better? I mean, if you're going, I guess it depends on the use or the function or the setting. If you're showing up to the construction site, the job site, I'd go with the big gulp cup. That's probably the superior cup for that situation. But guys, little free advice here. On a Valentine's date, you got to go with the champagne glass, right? The big gulp is not nearly as valuable on a Valentine's date. Look, what I'm trying to make really clear this morning is that gender and sex matter, and that both men and women are equal in value and purpose, made in God's image to reflect what God is like to the world that's watching. And even though we've been different, even though we're different, the differences are actually complementary differences. We have complementary functions and roles. But we have a bit of a problem in our culture today. Listen to some of these stats. If you like stats, you're going to be really happy this morning. If you don't, you're going to be really bored. I'm sorry. Hey, what if I told you that there was a group of people who in all 50 states were at least half a grade behind in school? This same group of people was a full letter grade behind in 10 of those states. What if I told you that this group was twice as likely to be suspended from school? They were less likely to own a home when they grow up. They're 50% less likely to graduate college. They're 50% more likely to commit suicide. They're 50% more likely to be imprisoned. What if I told you this group represented the single largest demographic factor in predicting early death? At this point, you've got to be thinking to yourself, well, we ought to help this group. We ought to do something to help this group. And then we find out that this group is men. And in the West, you guys, in the US and in the Western world, men are in crisis. And male unemployment is the highest since the Great Depression. Men are getting fewer degrees. Not that it's all about education. You understand that, right? It's not all about education. But men are getting fewer degrees than ever. Probably not a good sign for our society. They're marrying less. Did you know that? Men are marrying less. Did you know that 43% of women between the ages of 25 through 44 are single? 43%, and that number is going like this. And I wonder why. Well, 90% of women with a college degree say they would not consider dating a man without a college degree. I'd probably tell my daughter the same thing. Maybe. They also say they wouldn't date a man shorter than them. But look, we focus so much on feminism in the last 25 to 50 years as a culture. We've done nothing but bash men in the last 20 years for being men. All our focus on feminism, and 60% now, 60% of college students are not male. 60% of college students are female. And they're graduating into a world with no suitable men to marry. Dr. Anthony Bradley, who teaches at King's College in New York, he points out that 58% of males between the ages of 15 to 24 have never even approached a female. Got a generation of men who don't even know how to talk to girls. Men are not attaching to their work. You saw the unemployment rates. Men are not attaching to women, and men are not attaching to school. Men are not attaching to fathers because their fathers have left or were never around. But you know what men are attaching to? I don't know if it's very manly to start crying. It's so sad. You know what men are attaching to? A lot of us are attaching ourselves to pornography. In fact, did you know that that they don't even study the effects of pornography anymore among males in their 20s because they can't find a control group who doesn't watch porn to compare the users to. This guy named Chris Hedges, he says that the largest users of internet porn are boys between the ages of 12 and 17. And porn producers increasingly target adolescents. And Gen Z, as a result, is the first generation to be raised just marinating their brains on pornography. And I'm not going to say too much more about pornography here, but just suffice it to say, you guys, this isn't like our dad's Playboy magazine. It's entirely misogynistic, which I think means male-centered, male-focused, selfish, and increasingly violent. It produces high levels of dopamine to the reward center of the brain, making it also highly addictive. And like any drug, it requires increasing levels of intensity over time and must become more and more extreme in order to deliver the high. And one researcher pointed out how it's literally rewiring our brains. And what fires together wires together, and sexual violence is being woven into the minds of our youth, which is why the average age of a sex offender is 14. This academic woman named Mary Eberstadt, she says this: first, and contrary to conventional depiction, it's kind of fancy language. I hope you'll get the point. First, and contrary to conventional depiction, the sexual revolution that we've been experiencing has proved a disaster for many men and women. And second, its weight has fallen heaviest on the smallest and weakest shoulders in society. And even as it's given extra strength to those already strongest and most predatory. Basically, the sexual revolution has been really bad for men, and it's been really, really, really bad for women. More stats. Men are rapidly abandoning responsibility. There are 7 million able-bodied men who are choosing not to work in the United States. But worse than abandoning their work, you guys, they're abandoning children. 50% of adolescents don't live with their father. And 1 in 4 grow up without a father of any kind whatsoever. Get this, 90% of all homeless and runaway children come from fatherless homes, 90%. 71% of inmates and 81% of rapists come from fatherless homes. 60% of youth suicides come from fatherless homes. Children of fatherless homes, you guys, are 4 times greater at risk of poverty. Their daughters are 7 times more likely to become pregnant as a teen. These children are more likely to be abused. They're more likely to drop out of school. Children without fathers, growing up without a father in the home, is the #1 predictor of future fatherlessness. It's a generational sin, repeats itself over time. Sons are literally paying for the sins of their fathers. So if you're one of those people who's like, man, what is wrong with our world? Why are prisons growing? Why is there more depression, suicide, homelessness? And there's a lot of talk around the ills of poverty and around what's wrong with race. And as Christians, we should lean into these conversations about what to do about poverty and what to do about the racial divide. But the stats tell us that fatherlessness, not race or economic status, is the best indicator for the risk of incarceration, suicide, and homelessness. We got to do something about fatherlessness. Around a decade or so ago, President Obama quoted these stats. 500%, children without fathers present are 500% more likely to live in poverty and commit a crime. Children without fathers present are 900% more likely to drop out of school. Children without present fathers are 2,000% more likely to end up in prison. And all these stats are kind of coming together and creating a circular argument, which provides some wild quotes, you guys. Like real people that have like made money and are successful say the craziest things about what it means to be a man. John Stoltenberg wrote this book called Refusing to Be a Man. This is some people's answer, the secular world's answer, the problem before us. He says, talking about healthy masculinity is like talking about healthy cancer. These people are raising our next generation. Some of you watched the movie Avatar. You're familiar with the producer, I think he is, or director, James Cameron. James Cameron said that testosterone is a toxin that you have to slowly work out of your system. Unless, of course, you're participating in women's sports, then you might want to hold on to that testosterone. Anyways, I get really upset about the women's sports thing. What a crime against our girls. So look, the strategy of demeaning masculinity, ignoring men and not valuing their potential, it's producing the most dangerous people in our world. It's putting our economy at risk. It's putting our daughters at risk. It's putting future generations at risk. So church, what can we do about this problem? What can we do about it? And don't worry, church, we know the solution. If you're crying a lot like me, don't worry, I'm getting to the good news. There's some really good news ahead because we have the solution. We have the solution to this problem. We, the church, has the solution. Isaiah 58:12 says this, and your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. Look, here's the thing. There's a breach in the wall. There's a crack in the wall, and the crack in the wall is young men. The good news is that as believers, we've been called to run to the breaches, to run to the cracks in the wall, and to repair them. The solution to our problem, men and women, the solution is not no men. The solution is not to rid ourselves of masculinity. The solution is Christian men. This is the solution to our problem. The secular world has been saying that if you give men space to lead, they will abuse. Hence the phrase toxic masculinity. In fact, the co-founder of the Church 2 movement said that theology, listen to this, the founder of the Church 2 movement said that the theology of male leadership in the home feeds the rape culture that we see permeating American Christianity today. Social scientists have followed these statements. That's a strong statement, isn't it? Some people are saying that Christianity isn't the solution, it's actually the problem. Well, social scientists have followed these statements and began digging for evidence. And just by the way, I find it so interesting that a bunch of academics are proving that these accusations against masculinity are not true. The academics maybe are on the rise. They're doing something a little bit better than what's been done. Anyways, social scientists have followed these statements against the Christian model for manhood, and they began digging for evidence. So they went out and they did some studies that have come out in the past couple of years. You might be familiar with some of these, but again, this is like this gal, Nancy R. Piercy, is she looks like our moms looked in 1990, and she is saying a lot of really powerful truths about masculinity. So it's very interesting. You should Google her just to see an image. But anyway, she's, I don't know. She's amazing. God bless her. So here's what these researchers have found. Again, we're on the solution now. Well, what they found is that evangelical men who are engaged in a local church test out as, get this, not toxic, but the most loving husbands and the most engaged fathers. A woman named Bernice Martin. That's right. You go, Nan. Come on. A woman named Bernice Martin from the University of London. She said this: theologically conservative Protestantism. That sounds fancy. That's us. Theologically conservative Protestants. Okay? That's us. Okay. Theologically conservative Protestantism reforms men's behavior and strengthens their ties to their wife and family. This is what Christianity does. This is what the virtues of Jesus Christ does. It strengthens ties to the wife and the family. This is not toxic. This is what our world needs more of. This is what actually radically changed our ancient world. A guy named W. Bradford Wilcox, he's a professor at University of Virginia, not a Christian school. This isn't like we pulled Biola's theology prof. There's a guy who teaches at the University of Virginia. He writes in, not the Fresno Bee, but the New York Times. Okay, you're familiar with the New York Times. This is what he says. He says, the happiest of all wives in America are religious conservatives. Fully 73% of wives who hold to conservative gender values and attend religious services regularly with their husbands have high-quality marriages. Is the Christian vision for masculinity toxic? No, quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. Wilcox says that these kind of men, the ones who attend church regularly with their wives, they spend on average 3.5 hours a week more with their children than the average man. Fathers with their kids, is that good for society? Yes, it is, folks. These men have marriages that divorce at a 35% lower rate. These relationships have the lowest rate, not the highest rate, the lowest rate of domestic violence of any group in the US. According to the research, you guys, married Protestant men are consistently the most active and expressive fathers and the most emotionally engaged husbands. If you've been reading the Bible along with us, this is probably no surprise, but this is very surprising to our secular world. And like I said, this isn't some pep talk like these are a bunch of Bible Belt preachers pushing this narrative. These are academics writing for publications like the New York Times, working at institutions like University of Virginia, for example. And get this, the emerging narrative, it was so strong, because maybe you're thinking along with me, like, well, then why is the secular world making all these crazy conclusions? Well, the emerging narrative, it was so strong that these researchers have been shocked by the data, and so they decided to dig a little deeper. And they made a very helpful distinction when they compared the data between men who were serious about their faith versus men who were nominal about their faith. And nominal is a word that comes from the Latin word for name. Basically, nominal means to be a nominal Christian is to be a Christian in name only. So in the survey, nominal men say they're a Christian, but infrequently attend services, if at all. And get this, when you separate committed Christian men from nominal men who claim to be Christians, the nominal men test out shockingly different than committed Christian men. Nominal evangelical Christian men are less engaged with their children. Their wives report lower levels of happiness. We see the highest rates of divorce among nominal men, 20% higher than even secular men. It's worse to be a Christian in name only than it is to be a secular for your family. These nominal men have the highest rate of domestic abuse and violence of any group in the United States. Bradford Wilcox, the guy who works at University of Virginia and writes for the New York Times, he concluded that these nominal men are the most violent husbands in America. The most violent husbands in America are nominal evangelical Protestants. And these are the types of men who just hang around the fringes of the Christian world. They potentially hang around just long enough to get some language in them that fits their narrative, language like headship and male authority. But they do not go deep enough. They're not around long enough to understand the biblical meaning of those terms. They have a biblical vernacular with an Andrew Tate dictionary. Hopefully you don't know who Andrew Tate is, but I'm afraid you probably do. So hopefully now you guys, you're hungry for the answer to today's question, which is essentially, what is a Christian man like? God made us male and female. We've found that the females do really, really, really well when there's some good men around. So what does a good man look like? And it's at this point, I'd like you to turn with me to 1 Corinthians 16, verse 13. This is the Apostle Paul writing. And Paul says this, he says, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Let all that you do be done in love. And I just wanted to propose that this is a picture, a really succinct, clear picture of what it looks like to be a Christian man. It's really nice that it says act like a man in that passage. And this wasn't written just to men, more on that in just a minute. Number one, be watchful. A Christian man is watchful. He pays attention. Think of the classic picture of dad and the lazy boy. This is the opposite of watchful. This is the opposite of paying attention. Not that us dads don't deserve a chance to kick up our feet every now and again. That's right. I got one amen. There we go. Nan, you were quiet on that one. Let me hear you. Pay attention, men. This is our job. It's your job, men. It's our job. Young men, it's your job to pay attention. 1 Peter 5:8 says, be alert and sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Pay attention. There's a lion out there. Our enemy is looking for someone to devour. Look, we can't leave the household to our wives, men. We're not allowed to check out into work or hobbies or listlessness. Be watchful, Paul says. The second thing that Paul says is stand firm in the faith. I've noticed that many of us men are really good at standing firm. Stubborn, strong-willed. This describes a lot of the good men that I know. But what does Paul say? Stand firm in the faith. Sometimes as men, I think that we feel discouraged. And when we feel discouraged, often we check out. You know, if we can't win, then why even play? But other times we stand firm in the wrong things, for the wrong things. And men, I just wanted to ask, what if we were the most stubborn about the things of God? What if we were known, what if you men were known for standing firm, not for the Raiders, not for your job, not for your golf time, but for your faith? Standing firm in the faith. Our world needs men who will stand firm in the faith. Paul knew a thing or two about standing firm in the faith. Literally died many times for preaching the gospel, was imprisoned for preaching the gospel. What if we were the most stubborn about the things of God? What if our conviction around our faith was the driving force in our lives, guys? Not always, but sometimes the desire to provide and earn money can be the driving force in our life. Sometimes it's the desire to watch the Lakers or the desire to get with the boys and play some golf. Not bad things. Not bad things. But what if we were the most stubborn? The thing that we wouldn't bend on, man. What if the thing we would not bend on was the gospel of Jesus Christ and the importance of the faith in our families? What if we stepped out of nominalism and into the good man? We can put our stubbornness to a good purpose and find a good fight. I think Paul would call this the fight of faith. The next thing that Paul says is that we should act like men. I found it encouraging to know that the Bible actually says, act like men. Are you surprised to find that phrase in the Bible? In this day and age, it kind of seems a little surprising if masculinity is toxic, if testosterone is a toxin. What does Paul mean when he says that we can act like men? Clearly, those statements aren't true. Many translations, maybe your translation, probably your translation, you may have noticed, I used a different translation than I normally use, because the ESV, which is a very literal translation, word for word literal, is the one that says act like men. Other translations often use the phrase be courageous, because the Greek phrase that's used here, although it literally means act like a man, the connotation is wider reaching. And so the implication is that we can all be courageous. But the idiom of the day in the Greek vernacular for being courageous was act like a man. Telling. That's interesting. There was a time and place when manhood was seen as courageous. Evidently, the idea of acting like a man is a good thing, even though it hasn't seemed like that in our culture recently. But Paul follows it up with words that help to clarify what he means to act like a man. And the next thing he says is, be strong. Act like a man, be strong. Remember, men on average are more physically strong, bigger, more upper body muscle mass than women. To be strong is a masculine characteristic, not the only masculine characteristic, but it is a masculine characteristic. Some of you probably remember in 2018, there was a mass shooting in a bar in Thousand Oaks, California. I don't remember if any of you can remember back that far. As the story goes, one man entered the bar with a loaded weapon, threw out smoke grenades to distract the crowd, and began using his aggression, his anger, to take lives and kill as many people as he could. This is maybe a picture of toxic masculinity, the use of aggression to take away life. But there's another man in this story who acted to save lives. This man piled people under a nearby pool table and threw his body in the way so these women and people who are of lesser strength would not be shot. This man helped to run people to the door when there was a break in the shooting and came back in to save more lives. Yeah, masculinity has its vices, and we see some bad behavior. But masculinity, the strength of a man, can also be used to overcome vices with valor. Does the world need men? Yes. The world desperately needs good Christian men who will lay down their lives on behalf of another. The world needs men like this. It reminded me of a country song by Brad Paisley. Country music gets a lot of quotations in my sermons. It's not the only kind of music I listen to, but those of you that are familiar with Brad Paisley, you know that every now and again we need a man around here, right? Someone to kill the spiders. But legit, we do. We need a man around here. We need a couple men. We need a few good men. We need many men around here to stand up to the bad men. Anyway, the song goes on to say we need a man around here, someone to change the channel and drink the beer. I don't know if that's the kind of man that we need, but we do need a man that will kill the spiders. Which is always my job in my house. I find that to be interesting because Megan doesn't seem to be afraid of many things, but she always calls me to kill the spiders. Lastly, Paul says, let all that you do be done in love. And I think that this maybe could have been the leading line. Let all that you do, men, be done in love. Evidently acting like a man, a good man, is letting all that you do be done in love. And what do good men do? We see the example of Jesus. Good men serve others. Good men sacrifice themselves. Good men are strong, yes, but good men are led by love. As I close this morning, just a few words of, response. What am I calling you to this morning, especially if you're a woman? And I mean, men are kind of an interesting breed. If we're honest, men are an interesting breed. Men, we sort of respond fairly well to being yelled at, don't we? Like sometimes we kind of need it, Sometimes we need that charge, like, hey, man, act like a man. A lot of us respond really well to challenges like that. Like my wife told me this week that she'd like me more if I ditched the dad bod I've been working on and went back to the Abercrombie bod I had when we got married. And I didn't cry because I'm a man, right? But I did think about it for a second, crying. But you know what I did instead? I started working out. Now imagine if I had told her that. She's not sitting in here right now, so I get to tell the stories. But sometimes us men, we need a kick in the butt, don't we? You can nod along with me. I know I do. I know I do. We've been uniquely created that way, I believe, because you would not talk to a woman that way. We all know that, right? It's funny. I just really pulled the veil back a little bit there, didn't I? Look, some of us need a wake-up call this morning. Some of us need a wake-up call. And if that's you, then that's what you're getting this morning. And I pray that your heart's ready to receive it. And you know what? Not only that, but I'd love to pray for you this morning. If you're the kind of man that needs a wake-up call, I'd love to pray for you this morning. I don't want to just like pelt you with challenge. I'd like to come next to you and provide the care that's needed to get you over the hurdle that's in front of you. And in the end, a lot of us need that tenderness. You know, a good man is not just tough, but he's tender. He's not just courageous, but he's caring. This is the kind of man that we see and the kind of man that we worship in Jesus. Because honestly, like the challenge only gets you so far. If you've ever been like a coach, you know that, yeah, yelling kind of works. It has like a certain degree of efficacy. But if you don't at some point come alongside and establish relationship with that person and show that you really care, they're not going to care how much you know, right? And so we need this combination of discipline and warmth around here. Courage, yes, calls to courage, but also the care that's needed. Because shaming us doesn't actually work. 100%. Like I could end with that fact about manhood, or any of us really. Shaming us just doesn't produce the righteousness of God. Michael, in just a couple weeks, is going to be preaching on the fall of man. Adam and Eve in the garden. What happened? When they felt ashamed, did they run to God? No, they hid. They tried to fix the problem themselves, noticing their vulnerability and their nakedness before God. Shaming doesn't actually work. It's the dark side of calling us higher. And so this morning, I want to call us higher into a courageous call, but I also want to make sure that we care for one another and commit to walking each other through the journey, because I know we all need a father who balances this discipline and warmth.